Howard, you have decades of experience in this field. And if you could tell me, of all the experience you have, what have you learned or uncovered about bias as it relates to communication and decision making?
What's really funny, Ibrahim, because when I got into this field, I really stumbled into it. It wasn't, it's like I kept looking around and noticing the way people were behaving in ways that seemed so irrational, and it was a little bit like picking up a rock when you were a kid and seeing all the bugs underneath, and all of a sudden there was a whole world to explore there. I think it's by my nature. I think I'm a bit ADD, so by my nature, if you put me one place, I'm like, what about that, and that, and so here we are. I think there was one moment that I think captures it more than anything else. When I was doing the research for the book, this was probably back in 2012, 2013, of everyday bias I'm talking about now. I was sitting at a writing desk upstairs in my house, and where I was working a lot, and one day my wife came in and I was just sitting there staring, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I just read about the 100th study about bias, and I realize now that I have no idea what I think." And I think that was sort of the crystal of it, which is the way I say it is that people are not rational, we're rationalizing. And when we really begin to understand that, when we really begin to understand how much of our thinking, how much of our communication, how much of our reaction is just that, it's reaction, stimulus, spot, the response. Somebody presses that button on the jukebox and that song in our head begins to play. And at first that feels almost like hopeless, like, well, what chance do we have if we're that irrational? Was the first way it occurred to me. But then at some point I began to realize that if we really embrace that, if we really understand that and accept that that's there and begin to turn the inquiry inside as much as outside, to ask ourselves, where is that thought, that feeling, that reaction coming from, that can be liberating beyond anything we've ever experienced.
And I know you wrote in the book, Everyday Bias, we are not rational. Just like you mentioned, we are rationalizing.
Yes.
And it is my favorite quote. And this is exactly the one I use when I give presentations and trainings in bias and trust.
Yeah.
Because I think just like you said before, I think we all believe we are rational. We make rational decisions. And most of the decisions we make are probably influenced by our unconscious bias.
Well, there's no probably about it. They are. We know this for sure. And this whole way particularly in Western civilization, the whole way we view this goes way back. It goes back to Plato, 2,500 years ago, who wrote in the Phaedrus dialogues. He talked about how emotion were the horses and rationality was the charioteer who kept the emotions in play. And so for 2,500 years in our culture, we've worshipped at the altar of rationality. Are you sure you're being rational? Are you sure you're not being too emotional about that? The problem is that when we really look at the way the brain works, what we realize is that emotion drives almost all of our decisions. And in a lot of cases, our emotional reaction to the things we're dealing with occur before we're even aware of them, before we even have any sense of consciousness about them. So we're already in the path of reaction before we even are realizing what's going on. So it requires us to look at ourselves and to look at others in a different way.
This reminds me of Daniel Kahneman's book. I don't remember exactly the title.
Thinking Fast and Slow. Yeah.
Thinking Fast and Slow. I think he mentioned something about the fact that we make decisions based on emotions and we justify with logic.
Exactly right. Jake, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it actually also brings to mind the work of Dan Ariely in Predictably Irrational, which sort of takes that behavioral economics standpoint to another level of looking at how can we reliably count on people to be unreliably rational, as it were, or reliably irrational, I should say, and looking at this way that we can see how these biases survive because they're not being looked at, but it's built into the way that we engage with the world because we have to respond, we have to react, we have to act before thinking. As as Howard has often said, if a car is coming towards us, we don't think, oh, it's coming. What should I do? We jump out of the way and then all of a sudden are struck with this experience of, oh, wow, a car almost just hit me. When, we have these biases baked to our worldview because they keep us alive, and our brain simply can't process the kind of information that would have us stay on top of every individual element of the world around us. The problem is that the biases and in our worldview get baked very deeply into our systems for interacting with the world, which is how we come to biases influencing every individual relationship and interaction in our day-to-day lives.
And this is all at an unconscious level. So we're not aware of what is happening.
Yeah, not
Right.
only are we not aware, but we're very fortunate in a way that we react before we become aware, because if we were waiting for our awareness to kick in, it might be too late. Look, Kahneman gives a great example. He talks about you're driving in a car, the car in front of you hits its brakes and the taillights come on. If you were to go to your rational mind, what am I supposed to do now? Okay, you'd end up in the back seat of that car, right? But what happens is, for most people, your foot hits the brake pedal before you've even had a chance to think, because over a period of time of driving, this is why, by the way, it's so important that young people who are learning to drive for that first 6 months or a year, drive particularly safely until they can build up that muscle memory. But for most of us who've been driving for a while, the red tail lights go on, the foot hits the brake, and then we have a response to what's going on after we've already saved our lives, potentially. So it's important for us to understand, like Jake said, that this is survival that's driving this. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add one other piece, which is that that sort of perfectly depicts what underlies all of this work, which is that these biases, these experiences, they're practiced and they are learned and reinforced over a long period of time, which means two things. One, it means that we are absolutely a product of our environment, and that we can, there's a great line in a song from a musical artist called Magic Giant. It says, "You want to change the world, but how's your hometown?" And this sense that we can broaden our worldview outside of the understandings that are baked into us as children is sometimes it's the reason why people act one way as protest or politic, and act another at home. But the other thing, and the really important piece to look at, and the reason why this work still matters, even though the world has its own evolving challenges with this kind of language, is that things that can be learned can be unlearned, and can have attention brought to them. As Carl Jung said, until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will rule our lives, and we'll call it fate. And there's an opportunity there to bring to the present, oh, I've learned that. Oh, that's old behavior. Or, as I'm sure the listeners can all relate to as a favorite, oh, that's my mother.